Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight for the fourth episode in our webinar series for 2023. Tonight, we'll be hosting Breaking Down the Barriers to Research. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. It's fantastic to see so much interest in this important topic hosted by James Cook University's Northern Queensland Regional Training Hubs. My name is Andrea Muller and I'm the Program Manager of the Northern Queensland Regional Training Hubs. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where we live and work and pay our deepest respects to their elders, ancestors and future generations. This webinar series would not have been possible without the Commonwealth Department of Health, who fund the regional training hubs, as well as the collaboration and support of all of our speakers here tonight. Tonight, we are going to hear from Professor Andrew Mallett, who leads the first and largest renal genetics clinical service and program in Australia. Professor Mallett is currently the Professor of Medicine for James Cook University and the Director of Clinical Research, as well as a nephrologist with Townsville University Hospital, as well as holding a plethora of other roles. We will then hear from Professor Eddy Strivens, who is a national leader in geriatric medicine and dementia and is a practicing clinician at Cairns Hospital. Professor Strivens has also worked extensively with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in far north Queensland. After this, we will open the floor to a panel of junior doctors who will discuss their experiences with research and highlight the opportunities available in the North. And finally, if we have time, we will open the conversation to questions from the audience. At the bottom of your screen, you can see the Q&A icon. Please use this tool to ask any questions at the end of the session. But please now welcome Professor Andrew Mallett.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrea. So I will just quickly do battle with my share screen, hopefully which is working. Welcome to you all and thank you so much for joining this webinar. I am presently on a road trip for College of Physician Business, but normally would be joining you from Townsville, where I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in that area, which are the Bindal and the Wulkurukaba people, including their elders past, present and emerging. So the remit for tonight is deliberately broad, and we hear that you are interested to hear from Professor Strivens and I and the others around our experiences with research and how we enable research opportunities for emerging career members in medicine, especially here in Northern Queensland. So I'll give a brief introduction to research and the ethos that we take in general across Northern Queensland and specifically at Townsville. But the great news I can say is that across all of our health services in Northern Queensland, we work very closely together and enjoy wonderfully positive and warm relationships, which I think is much to the benefit of the junior doctors and interns who we have the fortune of being able to work with. So my background, I have been all over the place, but as you can see, I went to medical school in Townsville. So I actually was in the second cohort of the JCU program, but have done a master's at the University of Sydney, did my PhD at the University of Queensland. I happened to grow up in a rural town called Bowen, ironically on a mango farm, but I absolutely hate mangoes. I am an adult nephrologist who subspecializes in kidney genetics and am very involved in a variety of professional organizations and get to lead the National Consortium for Kidney Genetics, having opened the first clinic 10 years ago in Australia in August of this year. So research is interesting and it's hard and it's all of the words in between. I think that often when we're talking about research, we do think about things such as research higher degrees, which, as these memes will tell you, are not necessarily always for the faint of heart, but can be important components of one's research career, as both Professor Strivens, I'm sure will join me in saying as well. But this isn't all that there is, obviously, within a research career. And it's important, I think, for early career clinician researchers that there are more fundamental steps to take as part of your early training. Now, in Northern Queensland, we're often told that we're very lucky, but I would contend that luck is, in fact, the collision of hard work and opportunity. And so we're very fortunate to have a system where we make opportunity exist. And so very many of our colleagues, and particularly interns and junior medical staff, work really, really hard at their passion. And so hence, luck is exactly what has happened in this environment, because in a research sense, because of exactly this combination of key factors. Now, research is a complex beast, and I'll go through some quick overviews, to give some, I think, framework to interest. There's lots of different types of research is the key take home from this slide. There is everything from the wet lab type work to observational work, clinical studies, building frameworks in theory, as well as collating and meta-analyzing data. I love this diagram because I think it really brings home the cycle of exactly how we undertake research. And I think the key thing I tell all of our junior medical staff who are interested in getting going in research is that it begins with just asking questions. And those questions are best, I think, derived from the observations that you experience in your daily practice, on asking questions on ward rounds, in clinics, and with your colleague medical staff as to why is that like that? Why is this not like this? Or why did that happen for that patient? That's the best place to start. And then asking good questions and having supportive mentorship frameworks to then interrogate the literature and really then move through this cycle iteratively from there. And I hope that some of the junior medical staff who are with us tonight will also talk through their experience with things like this. Now, the type of research that you might do is always affected by a whole lot of factors. But there is a permissiveness to this in terms of, well, one does X type of research because, well, those things that enable it are available, and one doesn't do other types of research because it's not. So I think it's important to say that for every stage of your career in any location that you might be, these frameworks will help you to decide what type of research you might do. And in Northern Queensland, we're so fortunate to have a whole lot of infrastructures around, as I'll walk through in a second, that enable junior medical staff to engage with all different types of research that are really, I think, fit for and rich for their interests and passion. Research goes across this whole spectrum, as we were talking about earlier. And I think the great thing is, today in Northern Queensland, I'm aware that actually research is happening in each and every one of these tiers within our health services. And that is fantastic because it means that there's opportunity there for people like yourselves in the coming years as you enter internship and then your resident medical officer years to take part. This isn't hierarchical in terms of being better or worse. This is arranged in terms of weakness to strength of evidence, but there are very strong learnings that can come from incredibly unique case reports and things like that. So don't discount or think that, starting in the red, so to speak, here means that that's starting somewhere, that's worse than anywhere else. No, getting started is the key to getting ahead. So I think that, this is an important point to take stock briefly, for yourselves at a key juncture point in your career, thinking as to what you would like to do. Intern can be a busy year, no matter where you might do it, but being able to integrate the things that you're interested in, including research, I think is absolutely key. I think it's one of those things that helps to maintain variety and passion. And as you can tell, it's something that, lots of us as well in Northern Queensland are very passionate about. Where does it fit in our broader mantra of how we deliver healthcare? I see research, and my colleagues I know as well do, that research is an absolutely integral part of delivering clinical excellence and thus optimal benefit for the patients and community in which we operate. In fact, I would very strongly argue that clinical excellence is fundamentally unlikely to be possible in the absence of research excellence. And so these things go hand in hand together. And I think it's great to always see inquisitive colleagues and junior medical staff being able to contribute to that. The culture that we deliver, as you can tell, is enabling fundamentally, and it is investigator focused, meaning that it's focused on enabling yourselves to develop your own projects and follow your interests wherever they may lead you. Life is too short, I've been known to say, to do other people's PhDs. So I think that this is a great thing we've been able to engineer, and having great teams and capacity across the region has been, of course, a massive help. We, in the last few years, have really pulled this all apart as part of our engagement with people like yourselves to understand a bit better as to what we need to deliver. And now today, we're actually delivering, those Lego pieces back again, I think in a far more contemporary way, as I'll walk through briefly now. So the research culture that we have really relies on all of these different elements. So we've worked a lot, as you can imagine, on infrastructures, which makes it possible, the way that we do it and the interfaces to make it easy, working with communities of clinicians within the health service, so senior and mid-career and early career clinicians, to make it normal and accepted to do research. It's not just an exceptional on the side thing, it's part of what we do. And then also doing things like our Research Excellence Awards to ensure that it's rewarded, and now it's entering into policy at a health service level, which tells us it's actually a requirement that we do this as part of our everyday practice within both our health service in Townsville, but also others across the region. So in Townsville specifically, what are the things that we do within this mix? And we individualize this for individual people who approach us. We have lots of amazing mentors, clinical and research mentors. We have staff within our research unit, the Townsville Institute of Health Research and Innovation. We also have the benefit of being able to access co-located staff from James Cook University to support these research efforts. We have our own librarians within the health service who are just an amazing untapped resource for supporting literature reviews and systematic reviews. We're so fortunate across the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre to have a dedicated statistical support and research design team, which is open and available for all staff across the health services to access and support you in analysing the data and designing your study, which is, I think, amazing. We have our own research support officers internally as well who help, as well as research education programs, including twice a year in Townsville, a research education residential program for staff who are interested. And we also get to access the supports of our partners around us as well. So we aren't an island. We get to benefit from the other things that others in the area are doing as well. A really quick look through the big scary things that I think it's so important to demystify, because these are the big roadblocks. So firstly, a brief talk about ethics. We have a very supportive mechanism, both in Townsville as well as I know Eddie will talk about in Cairns, I'm sure, but we have the standard ethics pathway with our own NHMRC accredited Human Research Ethics Committee with a manager who's on site to support and provide direct advice. But we also have a streamlined quality assurance and audit approval pathway called Acquire, which is literally designed so that once one of yourselves or others as a staff member places the application, which we have a template form we support you in being able to fill out, then within 2 to 4 weeks, no more than 4 weeks, that can be fully reviewed and approved so that you can get on with doing the work within that project. After approvals, there are all kinds of other bits and pieces, particularly for fully ethically approved, so not quality assurance and audit projects. These can seem scary at times. There are frameworks around here, but I would strongly reassure you that we have a team in place to specifically support these activities as you may move through your research career. We also have an annual reporting mechanisms where we also support staff in terms of undertaking those annual reporting with us to make sure that we're on top of where things are and is not designed to be an onerous or excessive activity. So within Townsville, our landscape today looks like a whole lot of different things. We have specifically a research data lab, which we have resourced internally, which basically enables for staff with approved projects. They are able to, with that approval, pull the data for you out of all of the digital resources for our health service, including the EMR, which means that there's no more these hundreds upon hundreds of hours of having to sit by a computer and pull out the data manually into, these scary Excel sheets that have lots of errors in them and are very insecure. So it liberates time for yourselves and for staff to do that. We have our own research symposium, much as the other health services do as well. We have support programs with funding from our CERTA scheme, which is effectively a branch of our private practice trust fund. And we get to work, obviously, with the other partners and are looking towards, at the moment, an innovation program in the next few years, as well as identifying increasing numbers of clinical trials for junior medical staff to potentially contribute to as they grow over time. Given where Andrea said we were at the beginning, I'll hold over for questions, comments, and sometimes even outbursts until the very end, and hand back to yourself, Andrea, and all the best to Eddy.
Great. Thank you, Professor Mallett. That was very interesting, and thanks for your time tonight. So now can we please welcome Professor Eddy Strivens? Over to you.
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks, Andrew, as well, for what we all do and why we feel research is important and how we go about it. Now, I'm going to also battle with the screen sharing options here as we try and get this working. So I'm going to talk to you today in a slightly different theme. So what I'd like to try and do today is give you an idea of how I got into research, really. And I always refer to myself as an accidental researcher and someone who had a clinical question that needed answering, that worked with teams and community to get the answer. And I guess as a method of looking at these things generally. So what I'm going to take you through today is, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge again Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as this country's First Nations people, and in particular the Gimoy, Walabara, Yidinji and Yurakanji people of far north Queensland, and paying my respect to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders in the virtual room today. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the team that I work with, the Healthy Aging Research Team, which is based in JCU in Cairns, but also made up of clinicians and clinician researchers and researchers across Cairns and the Torres Strait, with also some members of the team down in Brisbane. And we work very collaboratively with community and with health services to answer some of those questions of aging that I'll come on to during the presentation. So I always like to try and master style over content sometimes. So there's some pictures of the Torres Strait as we go along, mainly because I'm going to talk about our research journey today, answering questions that have come from community around aging and the diseases of aging, specifically in the Torres Strait and the MPA. So as I said, this is a story of moving from clinical service to research and back again. When I started some of this work with the team 20 plus years ago now, we were very much an outreach service that a colleague at the time referred to us more as seagulls rather than penguins, where we'd come in on an outreach trip, do the business and fly back again to Cairns without really having our feet in the water and embracing what's going on locally. And really, it took a good few years of providing clinical service before we could even actually think about a research agenda, or indeed what to get from community, what are some of the questions they want answered. And it was actually the withdrawal of funding for some of these clinical service that led to using research as a method of re-engaging again and answering those community developed co-designed research questions. And when we think of this, I'm going to take you back to 20 years ago when we really didn't know what was happening around dementia in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And at the time, we'd done some work looking at referrals and looking at healthy aging clinics that we'd done, suggesting that dementia was higher in prevalence in First Nation communities. But there'd been good quality work done elsewhere in the world, especially with First Nation communities in North America, suggesting it was maybe a little bit lower. Then came in some of the work from our colleagues in Northern Western Australia with the Kimberley study, suggesting rates were up to 5 times as higher. and then in urban New South Wales as well, that suggested that we had rates of anything up to 3 times as high in urban Sydney and the north coast of New South Wales. But what was happening in the Torres Strait, another First Nation community, those other 2 studies really looked at predominantly Aboriginal communities rather than communities made up of Torres Strait Islanders with Aboriginal Australians as well. Well, one of the problems was we didn't really have a tool. So, question 1, identify the problem. The problem is that we think there's more dementia and diseases of aging, but we don't really have the tools to do that. So that the first step in here was around looking at an assessment tool that was culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate. Because if you think of some of the assessment tools we use for cognition, they're really designed. Well, the one most of you are probably familiar with, the Falstein's mini mental state examination, was designed for a white inpatient psychiatric population under the age of 60 during the 1970s. So really not particularly appropriate for a Torres Strait Islander living on Bardu Island. And so looking at a culturally sensitive tool was the first step. And this came really from requests, again, from community, that people found the tools that we were using to begin with really weren't appropriate. And so, again, working with colleagues and a collaboration across the north part of Australia, we looked at validating the Kimberley Indigenous Cognitive Assessment tool in Cape York and the Torres Strait, finding that it was a sensitive, appropriate, specific, and culturally sensitive tool, although it really spoke to more of an Aboriginal experience. And with this initial validation study, there was very much, again, a request to look at making it more specific for the Torres Strait, which we went on to do. So what's your next step? Well, the step after that was really around looking at how common dementia was. So you've answered your first question in terms of you found a tool that will help you diagnose it. Then you really want to go on to looking at prevalence. So what we did here was, again, we were small. We're not talking about a group with a massive track record or lots of access to research funds. This was the validation of the KICA was done on a very small grant from Queensland Health, which we managed to leverage off clinical service delivery. And from them, we really worked this rolling engagement, outreach clinics, and following up and feeding back to community across all of the Torres Strait and Northern Peninsula communities, so all populated islands in the Torres Strait. And from there, we did a pilot of the methodology to see if we could see what dementia prevalence was like using the KICA. That was successful. We got a small philanthropic grant from the Mason Foundation, which then allowed us to apply for an NHMRC project grant, which we were successful. And that then, using that, again, that methodology of community co-designed questions and then finding the answers, feeding back to community, and then asking community for the next steps, enabled us then to use that to gain funding for more clinics, and also working towards developing a community-driven model of care, which I'll talk about later. But this is the way we do, consultation and feedback doesn't just mean doing a report or doing a paper. It means, going on local radio. It means speaking to community events. We develop a calendar every year where we provide healthy aging tips and also feedback on any of the research that's been done. And this just gives you an idea of the fact that, this sort of methodology can give you results as well. So we've managed, as I said, to actually look what the prevalence of dementia was in the Torres Strait, but also then look at risk factors. And I'll come on to risk factors because, again, the feedback we got here was really against, I guess, the pejorative nature of risk factors, as if it's something you're doing to yourself, whereas we really have been trying to flip that paradigm and look at some of the prevention and enablement factors as well. So what did we find? Well, we found dementia was around 3 times higher. So about of the people that we saw, as again I said, we visited every populated island and community in the Torres Strait at NPI, and found that 36% of the people that we saw, and this was a 45 years and over group, actually had some form of cognitive impairment, and dementia was around 3 times as common, with the most common diagnosed subtype being Alzheimer's disease. So again, busting that myth that alcohol is responsible for all dementias in First Nation communities, which it is definitely not. And look at that vascular risk. So there's a nice gradient of risk as you go from left to right on this slide, that you can see that when you look at all these vascular risk factors, normal cognition versus dementia is always higher. All of those factors are higher in the dementia group. And this is, you know, significant findings, really, that gradient of risk that we're seeing here. And the fact that, in fact, out of everyone we saw with dementia or cognitive impairment, only one person didn't have at least one vascular risk factor. So this is then asks another question. So, you know, you find a stray thread and you pull it to see what happens. And so this brings us on to the idea of potentially preventable dementia. As I said, the request from community was around flipping that paradigm. So talking less about, you know, the end stage of the disease, but actually taking it right back into childhood, preconception, conception, and the first 1,000, 3,000 days of life, which is an unusual thing for a geriatrician to talk about, I know. But we did work then looking at, you know, the idea of a population attributable fractions, where you look how common a disease is in the population, as well as the strength of its association with the disease. And finding there that probably around half of the dementias that we're seeing in the Torres Strait are potentially preventable, and with a different risk factor profile than what we've seen from the Lancet Commission work worldwide, looking at hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and smoking being risk factors, but mood disorders and alcohol compared to Western countries is a lot less common. So where do you go from there? Well, again, taking those research results, you move on to the next thing and go back to community, and very much dementias and issues of aging have been seen as a community priority. And this has been both through sort of health equity studies, but also the planning that we've been doing using yarning circles. And there was very much, as I said, that wish for a co-design interventions using a strength-based approach and looking at that idea of aging well, and very much looking at Indigenous research methods and decolonisation research methodology. So where are we going? So rather than what we're doing now is actually looking at what healthy aging looks like in the Torres Strait. So developing a framework for healthy aging. So this was again funded via the NHMRC, and using yarning circles to talk to people living in the Torres Strait as to what aging well means to them. And this is people of all ages, looking at, you know, rather than just health priorities, but also look at what are the environmental, cultural, and spiritual priorities. So using more qualitative methodology, but then also looking at how we look at what's currently being provided. So look at identifying gaps of care and using that to then drive, you know, potentially looking at low hanging fruit. And use short cycle continuous quality improvement methodology to then actually see what's the problem. Let's look at an intervention to try and address that problem, see if it works. If it doesn't work, we try something else. And from that, across different communities, look at a framework for healthy aging. Because again, what works on Murray isn't going to necessarily work on TI, isn't necessarily going to work in Bamaga. So we're working across different communities. And this just gives you an idea what a yarning circle looks like on Warraba. So this is some of the, again, community engagement and yarning circles. We're also doing work as well at the moment, because one of the other things we found from the Healthy Adults survey was that we were seeing that we didn't really have the right language for looking at depression and anxiety and the assessment tools there. Similar to the issues with the mini-mental and other cognitive assessments, we're not the appropriate tools for screening in First Nation communities on the mainland aren't necessarily the same as the Torres Strait. So we've been successful there again with some philanthropic funding and are working at the moment to look at whether or not we need to develop a new tool or whether it's more of a case of adapting current tools. And that's well underway at the moment. And most exciting from those healthy aging priorities, we're now looking at how we can look at chronic disease prevention in the Torres Strait. So this is our most recent body of work that's still underway at the moment, where we're looking at and actually app-based diet and physical activity screening tools. So this is partnering with CSIRO. So again, examples of where you can actually work in the far north with researchers across the entire country and have those national and international collaborations, which are so strong in Townsville and Cairns. And we're working to then look at also environmental mapping, so to look at the impact of climate change as well on what's happening in terms of diet and exercises. There's a number of other projects, just to let you know, keeping us busy for the next few years. We're looking at looking at an appropriate framework for caregiving, assessing the caregiving experience, and also looking at a quality of life tool for the Torres Strait and MPA, working with the Centre for Research Excellence that we're on with Good Spirit, Good Life. We're using podcasts to actually look at that translation of what we found in research to give that broader audience of what aging well means and tips to age well. And also going to have the opportunity to revisit the cohort we saw in the Dementia in the Torres Strait study 5 years on, to have a look at longitudinal dementia prevalence, which will give us an attempt to look at incident dementia rather than just prevalence, and look to see then again whether anything we've done has had an impact as yet. So in the end, why do we do research? I think Andrew put it really well. You can't have clinical excellence without research excellence. And, you know, the advantage of this sort of research is there are practical, visible translations of research to practice that you can see in your practicing lifetime, you know, that we will end up with that framework for healthy aging. And through even the process of co-design, you build that local research capacity with the eventual aim to transition all of this to community control. We've already seen that the fruits of increased clinical service delivery in terms of more funding for outreach, specific for geriatric medicine. So not, you know, sort of just looking at other subspecialties, but looking at more generalist support, and also looking at another non-First Nations research work that we did, looking at taking comprehensive assessment into primary care and working with general practice, which has worked very well in the community controlled health organisation sector. And look, you know, from an organisation viewpoint, the HHS is like it, because all this stuff helps with their accreditation and helps with their service planning to translate that research excellence to clinical excellence. So with that, I will also pop off at this point for the panel, but just let you know, if you've got any questions on this or research in Cairns and far North Queensland and North Queensland generally, reach out to me on that. That's the Heart website address. And if you like the pics, that's my Instagram and Twitter handle.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks so much, Professor Strivens. And you certainly have highlighted the amazing research that's happening in Cairns and the Torres Strait. Thank you. Okay, so I'd now like to invite the panelists to unmute themselves and share their cameras. And I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Nicholas Sieben, Dr. Laura Shembry, Dr. Michael Robinson, and Dr. Rob Johnston. And they are going to provide us with just a brief summary of where they're at in their training journey and the types of experiences that they've had with research while training in our region. So firstly, over to you, Nick.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nick. I am an ICU pathway trainee at Mackay. My prior life in research was a master's level researcher in Canada before I came over for medical school. So I've seen some of the wet lab, but I've continued into clinical research post. I've kind of seen a little bit of everything, a little bit of emergency research, palliative and intensive care now. But the majority of my stuff is now sepsis. It's quite interesting in the Mackay region. You get stuff like the tropical medicine that in terms of rural research, but you also have differences in your communities that sit there. So we see a lot more end stage disease, and thus the research is more focused towards addressing that when it shows up to where when people show up to the hospital. And then we've had everything from case reports to prospective studies. So we're involved with tertiary randomized controlled trials and such. So it's not just limited to, we'll call it rural medicine. In terms of being at a regional site and doing regional research, colleges absolutely love when you do any amount of both of those. And it just so happens that you get a really good training experience from a research and from a clinical point of view, because the opportunities are there. There's just not enough people to actually fulfill all the spots. And sometimes it's easy as just putting your hand up saying, I'd like to do this. And people will be on board with that instantaneously. And we've got research in every department where we're from. So it's really, it's there and people want to support you. It's just a matter of asking.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Okay, Laura, would you like to share with us now?
Yes, thanks, Andrea. So my name is Laura. I'm one of the medical registrars at Townsville Hospital. I'm in my second year of VPT training. I've been lucky in my PGY3 this year to have done a little bit of research. I've done a retrospective cohort study in my junior doctor years. I'm currently in the process of publishing a case report. I'm hoping to do more research in the near future. In terms of like how I found out about research, to be honest, just from the get-go, I just asked a lot of people, expressed a lot of interest from my internship, and that led me to, some consultants led me to another consultant, which led me to the DP at Townsville, who referred me on to Professor Mallett. And from there, I was with Professor Mallett and the research team, was able to kind of bring a research idea to life and was very supported throughout that. So I was very lucky. In terms of similar to what Nicholas was saying about how research is in a regional area, because of all the major hospitals, as we know in North Queensland, are the hub for a lot of peripheral sites, it means that the data is really interesting. And also we can explore like what the challenges are with providing healthcare to such large distances and how we can improve those outcomes, which is really rewarding. And from a practical sense, if you're someone who's keen on interest, on research, being in a rural or regional hospital, there's lots of research opportunities, but the teams are not as big as they would be, say, in a metro centre. So it's really, really great opportunity to get involved by expressing your interest. Even as a junior doctor, everyone's quite keen to hear you're interested and get involved in that way.
Great, thanks, Laura. And we might go over to Rob.
Hey guys, I'm a advanced trainee emergency registrar up in Cairns. My background is I did honours in sports medicine and did a retrospective pharmaceutical-based trial in elite athletes. Following that, I did some musculoskeletal medicine in renal patients, and I have subsequently helped found a startup company in diagnostics where we look at gene expression, differentiate infective versus inflammatory conditions, starting with septic arthritis versus inflammatory arthropathies. We've run initial cohort studies and then large-scale validation trials across Australia. We've secured about $7 million in private funding to date, and we're currently going through validation trials at the moment. I've also had the opportunity to go through some unique experiences run by the Australian government in terms of getting medical and non-medical practitioners into more commercialisation and research, and how that interacts through the Bridge Check program, which is a funded program to kind of get people on a starting point, and then subsequently the Ready Fellowship program. And I've recently spent about a month down in Brisbane at the Royal at Stryker's new R&D centre, which is their flagship world-leading centre for research and development of their products. I've got an interest in sort of developing, taking products and ideas and how we look at the long track style of getting that into actual clinical use, as well as First Nations research, musculoskeletal research, and sort of how we push AI and genomics. I think adding on, I agree a lot with what Eddie said initially on, it's really important to look at where the problems are to inform your research rather than just coming up with an idea that isn't going to actually have any purpose going forward, and being able to evolve that. I think, as a lot of panelists have said so far, regional sites are quite easy to get involved in research. The only problem I think sometimes is there's a lack of people. They often want juniors to do a lot of legwork, which can be good, but sometimes means that you don't get the same autonomy. And I think also it can be quite difficult, and I've certainly talked to Prof. Strivens before about this, about how we adapt to make the process easier. and certainly so that you don't have to have the credit to be able to get things pushed through. That was one of the difficulties I had. I was lucky I had a team who were able to work through multi-site trials. But the difficulty being is when you're first making a name, you almost rely on working with bigger teams. Otherwise, projects will often be rejected. Otherwise, you just end up doing auditing. So I think there's quite a network from going both in private sector and public, inpatient and outpatient, and looking at the scope of how we move forward into the future. And I think it's something that's going to change over the next 5 to 10 years. Well, hopefully it is.
Great, thanks, Rob. And Michael, are you there? You want to go next?
Hi.
Great, thanks.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm an intern at Townsville Hospital, and I'm just starting my ED rotation this week. I had a brief introduction in research in a previous degree, where it was part of our assessment, but I didn't do anything for about the next 5 or 6 years until I decided to look at options for doing a research elective rotation in my final year of study. So then I was put in contact with Prof Mallett, who supervised me for 3 projects so far. So these projects are all based around deprescribing, and they involve a narrative review, a data audit, and a mixed method study. So I've now completed all of these and I've submitted the manuscripts. I also found it useful because I'm doing a Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine at the same time. So the mixed method study actually contributed to a 6 credit point subject for that. So it helped me get through that master's. Since becoming involved with the Townsville Institute of Research and Innovation, I've gained more information around the workshops that Prof Mallett mentioned, as well as opportunities and grants and all that stuff. I've thoroughly enjoyed my research journey so far. I find it does complement my clinical work quite well. Obviously better at critically appraising evidence, as well as it just being something different to your clinical day-to-day work. I definitely found the research process quite overwhelming at times, but the support and the staff here at the Townsville Hospital have been fantastic. Everyone's been super approachable and helpful and helping guide me through the process. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to get involved in research. I'm more than happy for people to reach out to me if there's any other questions as well.
Great, thanks, Michael. And if anyone does have any questions for one of the panelists in particular, you can get in contact with us and we can put you in touch with those people. Okay, so thanks so much to everyone on the panel. Hearing about your experiences and listening to your research experience has been really good. Once again, if you have any questions, please pop it in the Q&A icon to submit them. And while we might not be able to answer all the questions tonight, like I said, we will answer them and then send it through to you with a copy of the recording. Now, we did have a few questions that was previously submitted from people who registered. So someone asked, are there research opportunities from a critical care point of view, and are they easy to join projects in Townsville and Mackay-Cairns? Who would like to take that question?
The short answer
Andrew?
is yes. So yeah, I mean, we're really fortunate that there are obviously fairly substantial critical care facilities across the northern zone, between emergency departments, anaesthetic departments, ICUs, as well as obviously we have a pediatric ICU in Townsville and neonatal intensive care as well. And there's lots of very engaged clinician researchers across those spaces, many of whom would probably self-identify. Eddie, I think you have both, we've both heard this, as dabblers rather than professional, but I think they're more professional these days than they give themselves credit for. So there's lots of opportunity to take part, I think, across all of the different locations.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. Okay, and
yeah, and look, the knowledge also has, you know, some specific requirements there that they support the local sites on the multi-center research trials. So there's really good opportunities through the ED Medicine Research Foundation as well. So that there is plenty of opportunities in that space to work with researchers in the field and potential.
Thanks, Eddie. And someone else has asked, when do you think it's the best time to start undertaking research? The later years of med school, after med school, once you become in your junior doctor years, and then you should know more about what specialty you're likely to train in. Who'd like to take that one?
So I'm happy to, I have to give my opinion. So I did some research in med school in my later years as part of my honours thesis. Certainly that was quite intensive over that last 2 years, but I know other people that started a bit earlier than that. I don't think you necessarily have to at that stage. I then did some research because in my intern and second year out, which happened to be in renal, and I knew I never really wanted to do renal, not that it's a fantastic specialty and really interesting in North Queensland. But there was just cool stuff, and I saw an opportunity and I thought, this might not be for me. I'll learn something about it. I'll learn some research stuff, but it just something interested me. And I thought, hey, you know, what's the downside to it? So I think at any stage, don't be afraid to ask how you can be involved. There's always for big projects, we need data entry. And so at any stage, you don't have to be particularly skilled to do all of the stuff, and getting your name in and just showing and being passionate, you can get in a lot earlier. It's just talking to people. But yeah, any stage really. If you're only doing it because you need requirements, then probably be a bit later until you know what you want. But I think fundamentally, if you have an interest in it, find something that actually interests you to do it, because otherwise I think research can be quite grinding at times if you're not interested in it. Yeah, it just depends on the individual really.
Thanks, Rob and Eddie.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. Never too early, never too late, I think would be what I'd say is Rob identified it depends on your motivations. If you've got an interest in answering those questions and being involved, then as soon as you've got the opportunity, I mean, there are different colleges have different requirements in terms of both entry into programs and also progression through them. So, you know, that's not a bad motivator either, because a lot of people who've started doing sort of more mandatory projects have then used that as a stepping stone to a very productive career in research as well. So yeah, I think we are never too early, never too late.
Great, thanks, Eddie. And we've also got a question from an international medical graduate who's interested in doing ophthalmology research, but they said, are they able to start research projects even if they have not yet obtained registration?
Yeah, I mean, you can work with the university without medical registration as a research assistant. It will limit your ability to some of the clinical pathways, but yeah, there's nothing to stop you without registration to work through an academic path.
Okay, great, thanks, Eddie. Someone else has asked, can you tell me more about the research opportunities for mental health and neuroscience in the North?
So I can take that very quickly. So obviously this is a really strongly emerging area at the moment, both in terms of clinical training, but we're fortunate that we have here the main training hub for psychiatry and mental health training based in Townsville, and there's a number of research groups within the university also spanning into both adult and child and adolescent mental health services who have lots of different projects and interests. So there's the whole spectrum of different mental health services based hubbed across the entire region or zone, as it used to be called, hubbed from Townsville, but with local services available both in Mackay as well as in Cairns. So there's lots of opportunities there, I think, to jump into mental health focused research.
Right, thanks, Andrew. And someone else has also asked about radiology research in the region.
I think that the quick answer about all of the ologies, basically, name a specialty, and there is tertiary level experience and the top level of accredited training opportunity in Northern Queensland. So there are opportunities in all of these areas. The biggest definer of success, I think, for individuals is your own personal passion. Often the supervisors they specialize in mentoring far more than the things that you want to personally research, and they're there to guide you around. But all of those different quaternary and tertiary level services are available. And now, just like in this meeting, we've got Zoom, which is great. So, even if they're not in whichever place you happen to be, you can reach out and collaborate with other people in other parts of the region or the country.
Just add one of my early stuff in renal musculoskeletal conditions, radiology component to it, because one of the interns I was going through who helped me on the project, he wanted to get onto radiology, and he's subsequently a second year now based on that sort of project. So even if it's not necessarily going purely radiology, you can expand things from different areas if you don't have access to the radiology as the primary side.
Oh, great, thank you, Rob. So one of the myths too that's often spoken about is that if you do your junior doctor training in Metro, that you'll have a much better chance of getting onto specialist training pathways because you'll have more access to research opportunities. And obviously research on your CV does give you extra credit points and bolster your chances. But then I've heard a lot of people say that they're just one of 20 in the back of a room at RBWH. So can you let people know, the brilliant opportunities that are available in the North to do research, and that you actually may have better chances to be doing your research and junior doctor years up here? Nick?
Just addressing the better chances to get on programs bit. Almost every specialty needs some amount of regional time now, independent of the research part, but having research in regional areas also kind of helps that scenario a little bit more, and it's a little bit more available as well. So I would argue strongly against that myth. And even just the regional time itself, you'll be upskilled way quicker. I feel very comfortable going toe to toe against Metro equivalents of myself, just based on the peer amount that they ask me to do. And the research opportunities are just floridly there. It's really initiative to get it going and done.
Great, thanks. And maybe just a question for you, Eddie. You were saying you were going into those communities to ask questions and obviously to get to know, what was the need. How did you first form those relationships?
Very much through that clinical service delivery path. So really it was a question of, being there and providing that service for quite a few years before there was really, sort of any question of looking at research, and that clinical service was never intended as a door opener for researchers as well. I guess communities like to see that that idea of co-design, community consultation, and reciprocity is there, rather than the fly in, fly out research team that gets their paper or their high degree by research and is never seen again. You need the runs on the board to show that you're there for the long run and you're actually developing what the community specific research questions are that lead to better quality care, and that interface between research and clinical service delivery.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, Laura, you might know more about this, but I know that a lot of the student specialty groups have like research and rosé nights. I think the staff societies also run those types of research nights. Is anyone able to talk more about those? Andrew, do you know if they run through TMSS as well?
Yeah, so these do operate. I don't blame Laura and Michael for remaining quiet on them, because they're a nice little secret. So I think they're a great event done by the Medical Staff Society, and often in conjunction with the specialty interest groups within the medical school locally. And I know similar things happen in the other sites as well. And they're fairly casual affairs to kind of just socialize the concepts about research and make it much more demystified, I think, really, and so that it is more doable and people get to celebrate the research that they have been able to do, and field questions, all whilst, as the name would suggest, sipping some rosé.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time and hearing about all of your experiences and listening to your points of view. Unfortunately, we will have to wrap it up now, but like I said, if you do have more questions, please contact us at www.nqrth.edu.au, and we will either put you in contact with the person that you'd like to speak to or field your questions. And this is our final episode of the webinar series. On behalf of the NQRTH team, I'd like to thank everyone for making this and all of the episodes so fantastic. And thank you to all of the doctors and professors for giving us your time tonight. The recordings will be available on our website, and we will also send it out to all of the people who did register for the session tonight. And if you do need any additional information or questions, you can visit our website, as I said, or you can also check out our Facebook page. I can't speak, sorry. Yes, and please feel free to forward through more questions. So thank you everyone once again.